I want to talk about a subject that people just don't talk about in racing, and that's death. Death and serious injury. I've been involved in racing now for 60 years. I've seen just about it all. Been involved in sports cars, Indy cars, F1 cars, and of course NASCAR racing. I've seen a lot of death. We've had a couple of sprint car deaths in the recent months. We saw Denny Hamlin break a vertebrae in a horrific wreck out in California. And latest, but certainly not least, is Tony Stewart's leg break in a sprint car race recently. Death, unfortunately, and it shouldn't be, but unfortunately it is part of this sport called racing. My first association with serious injury was when I was a teenager at a little micro midget track in Cherryville, North Carolina. Guy went off the track. Now this was the first or second race at this particular track. I was racing those cars back then, by the way. I was probably 15. And he went off the track, and unbeknownst to the guy that built the track, there was a barbed wire fence out there. And he went through the barbed wire fence. And obviously, I think it took 100 stitches to get him back together. That was my first association with serious injury in a race car. Since then, I have seen it time and time again. Moving forward, and we get out of my early days of dirt track racing, which was quite dangerous in those days. I fast forward to the time I went to work for the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, and my first assignment in 1964 was Riverside, California, for the NASCAR race. Riverside was a devilish racetrack. Instead of concrete walls, they had boilerplate walls that they salvaged off ships that were being cut up in Long Beach, California. So the walls were boilerplate, and they were backed by earth, which means when you hit them, they did not move. Something else had to move. Well, my good friend Joe Weatherly, who I'd known for quite a while from working down at Darlington Raceway, Joe didn't like to wear shoulder harnesses. He wore a seatbelt, but not a shoulder harness. And now I was also at that time, did a lot of writing for Columbia and Spartanburg Herald and different papers like that. So all the guys, press guys, knew me. And I was the only Southern writer, per se, out in Riverside. Joe went up through the S's, up the hill to that hard right turn in Bud Moore's car, and something happened, and he slammed that boilerplate wall. Well, not having a seatbelt, his head went over, and his head hit the wall. Joe was killed instantly. Great driver, funniest guy that ever was at a racetrack, maybe outside of Tom Pistone, dead. So I had to put the story together to send back to various papers in the South, Atlanta Journal, Charlotte Observer, Spartanburg, etc. So I wrote the story on Joe Weatherly's death, and it was a tough thing for me to do because I knew Joe so well. And folks, that started it. 1964 began the bloodiest period in the history of auto racing. More drivers were killed, burned, etc. from 1964 to 1969 than any other time that I can recall. And it wasn't just stock cars, it was Indy cars first, because the Indy car went to the rear engine car, and it was the most foolish thing that rule makers ever let happen, because Those old Watson Roadsters, as stiff as they were, they killed people too. That rear engine car at Indy was brutal. The driver laid down in a lay down position, semi-prone lay down position. And his legs were between two aluminum fuel tanks. So the only thing between he and a concrete wall was a thin sheet of fiberglass, aluminum, not very thick, and then gasoline or alcohol. So when he hit that wall, particularly with those magnesium wheels, sparks flew, gasoline came out, and boom, we had the napalm effect. Killed a bunch of race drivers. Next YouTube, I'm going to tell you about Eddie Sachs and my experience with Eddie Sachs' death at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 1964.